And a hearty welcome to one and all. We're back in the car for episode 185 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for taking this ride home with me on this Monday early evening here in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. So episode 185 will be the 15th, we're almost all even on all three, 15th entry in our continuing series of guilty pleasure movies. And the other continuing series are the best movie you've never seen, which apparently is very popular, and most underrated film performances. And I made a little bit of a joke about Sylvester Stallone having already taken part on a number of the guilty pleasure movies, and we've got another one for you today. The 15th entry of guilty pleasure movies is none other than Rocky IV, 1985's completely bonkers, absurd, stupid, but oh so magnificently entertaining Rocky IV. Basically a 90-minute music video would be how I would describe it, and I feel like Roger Ebert may have described it that way or something close to it, because it did come out at the height of the MTV music video era, when MTV still played music videos. That was a big thing when I was a kid, and people are still talking about it as if it's new that it hasn't been 3 decades since MTV played music videos with any regularity. But Rocky IV, not surprisingly, the fourth film in the incredibly successful Rocky film series, which of course includes the 3 Creed movies, all of which were box office successes, and all of which got really good reviews, especially the first Creed, which, reviews of that one rival even the original Rocky, which I guess, even though it won Best Picture, I saw a thing on the internet that said the Rotten Tomatoes score, currently, of the original Creed is actually very comparable to the original Rocky, which I think is amazing. But it just shows the quality of what Ryan Coogler, the filmmaker, and Michael B. Jordan, the actor who directed Creed 3, and I thought he did a terrific job. It's not as good as the first 2 movies, but it's still a good movie and worth seeing. Now, Rocky IV, have to give the backstory on what it is, and there are certain spoilers that I'm not going to be able to avoid going into. So the original Rocky, as almost everybody who would tune into this sort of podcast knows, is about a kind of club fighter from Philly. And when I say club fighter, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have any talent, but that he's not a top 10 fighter. He's a guy that doesn't fight big cards in big arenas. He fights in smaller, clubs, where it might be a VFW hall with 500 people or something along those lines. It's not that much different today than it was, 50 years ago. But Rocky Balboa, the character that appeared through the first 2 Creed movies, playing Michael B. Jordan's trainer, Unk, this is the guy we're talking about. He was a Philadelphia southpaw club fighter who actually had the natural talent to be a contender, and simply either he didn't apply himself, or the trainer, Mickey, had a problem with him because he didn't think that he was naturally a hard enough worker, but it was something, and he ended up being a club fighter despite the fact that he had the talent to be a major heavyweight force. And this is something that gets overlooked to me when people discuss the first movie, because the film takes the form of Apollo Creed, that is the father of Adonis Creed, Michael B. Jordan's character in the new movies. He ends up fighting Rocky Balboa. This young kid, nice enough looking guy, the Italian Stallion, we love his nickname, gives him a chance at the world heavyweight title. Rocky's record isn't really that impressive, and he's fought a lot of people that were not very good and wasn't really that impressive in a number of his fights, but a big part of it was he wasn't training properly, he was not maximizing his potential, and Apollo Creed doesn't realize, because how can he possibly know? There's no internet, there's no way to look at a guy. They have little bits of footage, but nowadays someone like Apollo Creed would be aware that, no, wait a minute, this is a bit of a sleeper, not just because he's a southpaw, but this guy has tremendous talent. I probably shouldn't risk, let's find another tomato can, because this guy is not a tomato can. So Rocky Balboa ends up, as the series progresses, his relationship with Apollo Creed goes from kind of comic antagonism to real antagonism to what would have to be considered true friendship and brotherhood. Brotherhood of the fist, brotherhood of the warrior, the code of the gladiator, whatever you want to call it. But their bond is forged over their tough battles in the ring, where each guy gets the better of the other at various points. And then famously at the end of Rocky III, they have a fight which we don't see. And we don't actually learn who won the third fight because it was not official. It was just the two guys banging away at each other at the gym, busting one another up, until presumably one guy said, it's enough. We don't need to go home. We need to go home. We don't need to kill one another for real here. We are friends after all. Boom, boom, boom. We find out in the first Creed movie that it actually was Apollo that emerged victorious in their fight, where nobody knew, it wasn't recorded. It was just the two guys going at it. Basically, it would be a spirited sparring session where they were trying to take one another's heads off, presumably. Rocky IV takes place in a timeline in which Rocky Balboa is the reigning heavyweight champion, and Apollo Creed, his now best friend, and the wives are best friends, and there's no mention of any Adonis Creed because Adonis Creed had not really been thought of at this point. But they're best friends, and Apollo is comfortably retired. And the kind of weird thing with Apollo Creed's career, from what we can understand, is that up to this point, he's only had 2 difficult fights in his career. We're led to believe that he was blitzing everybody. He was beating the shit out of everyone. And in his 40 or whatever it was fights, I don't think he'd even gone the distance. And I don't know that any of those fights were even competitive. It's as if you took like a prime Floyd Mayweather, prime Ali from the 60s, something like that. Or if you just had Mike Tyson when he had that stretch in the mid-80s where he was fighting one overmatched opponent after another. And you made that Apollo Creed's entire career up until the moment that he fights Rocky Balboa in the original Rocky. So his character has not taken much punishment. He is not a damaged man. The worst beating that he took, ironically, was in the first fight, which, spoiler alert, he ends up winning. Although Rocky goes the distance, Apollo wins the decision comfortably from what we can gather, even though Rocky really busts him up, breaks a number of his ribs, internal bleeding, but Rocky looks even worse if you want to get technical. And in Rocky II, Apollo has his way for most of the fight and just stupidly doesn't want to stay away from him. Almost in 1994, Michael Moorer coasting to an easy decision over George Foreman, who was old. Again, by normal person standards, George wasn't old. By heavyweight boxing world class, he was old. He was already, 42, 43 at the time? May have even been 45 now that I'm thinking about it. But the idea is, you're the champ. If you have a fight won, if you're winning in rounds 8-1 or 9-1, you don't stand in front of your opponent. You don't start swinging for the fences. There isn't any reason. Nobody does that. Well, I shouldn't say nobody does that. Very few people do that. Ali did that in a fight with Shavers, where he knew ahead of time going into the 15th, because there was so much controversy. This is an incredible true story. You can Google this. There was so much controversy then with the scoring in boxing that they wanted a certain level of transparency. So they, on the ABC broadcast of Ali versus Shavers, which it's pathetic that I know the date, September 29, 1977, Madison Square Garden, they flashed the scores in between rounds. And I don't mean like HBO when they would have Harold Letterman give his scorecard, in between rounds. I mean the actual scores while the fight was in progress. So in the Ali Shavers fight, after 14 rounds, and Ali really took a terrible beating. That might be the worst beating he ever took in the ring. And he ended up winning the fight because Shavers hit like hell. Ali could really take a hell of a shot, whether it was to the body or the head. Almost to his health's detriment, not almost, to his health's detriment, take these fucking home run bombs and just walk right through him and be like, bro, you can't punch, you're a sissy, or whatever he used to say to his opponents. He said a lot of different goofy, funny shit during fights. People got a kick out of it. Meantime, he was getting his brains beat in and he was still winning the fights. But in the Shavers fight, Ernie put a big whooping on Ali in round 14. It looked like there was a point where Ali might go down, and then there was a slip which kind of looked like it was a knockdown. But going into the 15th round, according to the actual scorecards, Ali had an insurmountable lead on the cards. So, like they were telling him in his corner, just don't get knocked out. Just stay away, tie him up, cover up, just survive 3 minutes and you've got the decision. It wasn't good enough for him. It wasn't good enough for Ali. Now, Ali was way past his prime. He was 35, which again, that's not old. There are fighters, Floyd Mayweather, for example, was still a great fighter and almost prime level Mayweather when he was 35. Ali was pretty much shot. He could still fight, and he was a reasonable facsimile of himself, and you couldn't move him, you really couldn't move him in the ring. Because Shavers landed some punches that would have knocked most guys unconscious, and Ali was standing there clowning to the crowd. But Ali, that wasn't good enough for him. I think he was frustrated by the fact that Ernie had put such a licking on him, and he said, fuck that, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to knock this son of a bitch out, or words to that effect. And he did the opposite of what his corner said. He went out there, and he wasn't reckless, he wasn't swinging wildly, and he wasn't letting Ernie hit him. But he went out there to take the fight to the challenger, which is pretty much the opposite of what you're supposed to do. You know, follow a boxer to take his crown, follow a puncher, you get knocked down. Ali started stalking Shavers in the last round when he should have been beyond exhausted. I mean, they don't fight 15 rounds anymore. He went out there, and Ernie landed some shots, and Ali landed some shots. But in the last 30 seconds, and this is why people like me will always point to Ali as somebody different and somebody that there is only one. And Mike Tyson has talked about this repeatedly on various podcasts and TV appearances. In the last 30 seconds of that fight, when he could have got knocked out, he took the fight to Shavers. And if the bell hadn't sounded, Ernie was going down and Ali was going to knock him out. He would not take a decision. He would not take a decision. And in the second Rocky movie, oh, I should point out where I was going with the George Foreman, Michael Moore. Michael Moore was ahead 9-1 or 8-1 in rounds. And he went for a knockout, as Ali did, but Ali not only got away with it, but he won the 15th round and nearly knocked out Shavers. Michael Moore went after George Foreman instead of continuing to box beautifully. The irony of that fight, it was probably Michael Moore's best performance because George could still hit like hell, as we found out. And George was tough. He knew how to steal rounds. And Michael Moore was very shifty. He had that great movement, that lateral movement. He was like Jersey Joe in there. But instead of stick and move, duck, move in, he starts acting like he's trading shots with Foreman. He's going to knock Foreman out. What happened was George landed one single punch, knocked Moore pretty much unconscious, and won the title. In Rocky 2, Apollo can't accept another decision. The code of the gladiator. I'm going out on my shield. I can't let this guy take me the distance. Yes, we know he's a great fighter. I can't let Balboa take me the distance again. I'm taking him out. And he goes out there, and that attitude costs him the fight. So as we pick up Rocky 4, Apollo is retired, and there's still a part of him that can't accept the fact that he lost to Rocky Balboa. Because as he says to Rocky in Rocky 3, you fight great, but I'm a great fighter. So Rocky 4, proper, deals with a young Russian amateur fighter tearing everything up. I don't know if he was an Olympic champion. This part I'm not clear on because I haven't seen the movie in a few years, and they don't really make that big a deal about whether or not it was Olympics or he was just an amateur crushing everybody. But it was Dolph Lundgren, who I love Dolph Lundgren. We've seen him in The Expendables, of course, with Stallone. They're still friends, and he played the father in Creed 2. Florian Monto is the name of the actor who played the boxer, you know, the big competition for Adonis Creed. So Dolph Lundgren plays Ivan Drago, who is this brute. Basically, he would be like Vladimir Klitschko if Vladimir Klitschko barely spoke and was even bigger and more indestructible. Because the thing with Vladimir, even when he was in his prime, he had fights where he took pretty good pounding. And, we remember, or people like me with Corey Sanders beat the hell out of him. when Vlad should have still been in his prime. So he was not untouchable, but he was a great champion, as was his brother Vitaly. Just tremendous. But that kind of size, where he's way bigger than the old era, the 70s era heavyweights in the world of these movies, such as Rocky Balboa, who realistically would have been a cruiserweight if that, and Apollo Creed. Carl Weathers was a naturally bigger man than Stallone physically. He was a football player. So this guy, this Ivan Drago, is making waves, and the competitor, the kind of anger that still exists in Apollo Creed. He lives comfortably. He's a multi-millionaire because in addition to boxing, he made great investments. We're led to believe he was just a really well-rounded person. He was a great guy. It's basically what it is. And it's one of the reasons why Sly's Rocky Balboa latches onto him, because he's the kind of person that Rocky would aspire to be more than the other way around. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of your labor. See, Rocky 3 kind of played with this a little bit, the concept of the eye of the tiger. Apollo Creed never lost the eye of the tiger. He never stopped being hungry. It was one reason why he was so successful for so long. And at the time of Rocky 4, he is old by the standards of top-level heavyweight boxing, but again, he's not old by normal person standards. He's probably supposed to be in his mid-30s, maybe late 30s, but he's not old and decrepit. He's not 45-year-old George Foreman scoring an incredible one-punch knockout over a guy who was kicking the shit out of him all night. I mean, George's eyes were all puffed up that night, but follow a boxer to take his crown, follow a puncher, you get knocked down, or in the case of Michael Moorer, you get knocked unconscious and lose your title to a guy 45 who had first retired 18 years prior. George Foreman retired in 1976, for crying out loud. He was 27. I'm done. But Apollo Creed cannot accept that this young Russian is making waves and he wants to fight him. And so he signs for a exhibition match, which, needless to say, does not go the way anyone has had planned, except maybe the Russians. And Apollo Creed loses the fight really, really badly. And people who've seen the movie, I'm sorry, I'm not going to spoil, even though the original ads did spoil it. But Apollo Creed gets absolutely blasted by Ivan Drago. And it's basically up to Rocky Balboa to take him on, if in fact that is a thing, if that's even possible. And we saw this again in Creed 2. These things are not accidental. What we get from Creed 2 is that Drago's son, Victor Drago, is so much bigger than Adonis Creed. As diesel as Michael B. Jordan is, Florian looks like he's twice the size. The real life guy looks like he's twice the size. And so what you saw and what you see in Rocky 4 in the so-called exhibition match is that Apollo, Carl Weathers, is jacked. I mean, he is jacked. Dolph Lundgren outweighs him by 50 pounds. They're both chiseled, but it's kind of not a fair fight. What we're presented with from Ivan Drago, he might actually have beaten prime Apollo Creed just because he's so much fucking bigger. Would the best cruiserweight in the world beat one of the Klitschko brothers? I don't know. That's a tough go. Somebody 195 pounds against a 260 guy? I don't know. There's no way to answer these questions. Would 1966 Ali at 215, would he beat Tyson Fury? I don't know that either. I think he would certainly be the betting favorite, but that doesn't mean that Fury wouldn't take his head off at least one time out of 3. Sometimes, not to get cute, sometimes size does matter. So, Rocky Balboa, after his friend's catastrophic loss, he decides, even though he doesn't have to, and he's at an age where he's done enough, he's given enough to the sport of boxing, he doesn't need to continue. There isn't any reason for him to risk permanent injury. There's no reason. You can just walk away. It's okay. He can't. In his brain, his code of the gladiator, I can't just walk away, even if it costs me everything. I can't let this sit. This is not acceptable. Apollo shouldn't have taken the fight. That wasn't smart. But I can't just let this go. I have to do something. I got to fight this guy. So, that's basically the movie. is this unbelievable, and the setup is great, and the fight, the choreography is extraordinary, and Rocky IV is not a good movie. I mean, if you're asking me, is it? No, it's not good. It's so absurd. It's so preposterous. Nothing in this movie could possibly happen. Okay, everything, it strains credulity beyond the pale. And this is why, although the movie was a monster box office hit, I don't know the numbers, but I know it was certainly one of the biggest hits of its year. And inflation adjusted, it was the biggest hit in the franchise. I don't know about today when you start comparing for inflation, because the Creed movies were huge, as we know, box office wise. But Rocky IV, despite the fact, you go on Rotten Tomatoes, it's like 29%. So 70% of critics thought it was shit, is what the translation of that. It's so much fun, though. It's so much fun. And Sly looks great. He's dialed in. And I love what Carl Weathers does in the first act. We really feel it. And it's not something that I can understand just as a fan of great fighters and all-time greats in boxing. But he's sincere. The mechanics of plot, a lot of them may be ridiculous, but Apollo Creed is not ridiculous. He can't be a normal person. He has to continue to do it. And we've seen it, unfortunately, with even recent fighters like Evander Holyfield. You just can't walk away. You have killer instinct. You just can't pretend that you don't. And so when he screams at Stallone, "Where do we go, Stallion? We can't be born again." He can't accept that he's becoming a regular person. He can't. And this, as he says, it's something I believe in. I've got to fight this guy. And Rocky also, later in the movie, understands, and his wife Adrian doesn't get it. She doesn't get it. It's the code of the gladiator. This is my time. And if this is my time, so be it. I've had a good run. But I'm going out on my shield. Same idea. I'm going to go out on my shield, one way or the other. Either I'm taking him out, he's taking me out, and I'm okay with it, because this is what I do. Or as he said to her, because I'm a fighter. This is what you married. This is who you married. You didn't marry a guy in a designer suit, although Rocky could wear a designer suit and a $50,000 Rolex, same as Apollo Creed, but that's not really who they are deep down. And the movie does a good job elucidating that. But yeah, the mechanics of plot are complete idiocy. I mean, come on, like none of it. There's nothing in there that could happen. But it is so entertaining, and Stallone showed such a great eye for not just detail, but understanding where to put the camera during the fight scenes. I mean, when I say that, meaning he tells the cinematographer, because Stallone wasn't literally holding the camera. He may have looked at it, to get the ideas of the shots, of course. But his eye is great, and the fight choreography, it's fantastic. It's some of the best fight choreography. And most people would say, for realism and the sound effects, that what Martin Scorsese was able to achieve in Raging Bull 5 years before Rocky IV is next level. But the fights, see, it's weird. It's kind of a strange irony. The fights in Raging Bull are more realistic. There's more clutching and grabbing, less clean punching, if that makes sense. And that's by design, because Scorsese was going for more realism. The fights in the Rocky movies are basically one home run bomb after another. It's one Marvin Hagler versus Thomas Hearns. That's the closest where two all-time greats had what amounted to a Rocky fight for real. The fight choreography in Rocky IV, in the Apollo fight, and in the fight between Rocky and Drago, extraordinary. But the fight taking place in Russia, no, that's not going to happen. That would never happen. It's in Russia. No. And the idea that, spoiler alert, the Russian boxing fans would start cheering for Rocky Balboa. I mean, give me a break. That would never. I love it, though. It's so idiotic. And Stallone's speech, it's almost like the speech at the end of First Blood, where he just kind of pours his heart out. It's absurd, but it works. It is every inch a guilty pleasure movie. The thing with the robot at the beginning and Paulie, the brother-in-law. There's so much in this movie that just is howlingly funny. Even if some of it was intended to be funny. The shit with the robot was supposed to be funny. But there's stuff in here that's it's so dumb that you can't help but laugh at the sort of cheesy aspect of it. But with that being said, it all works. It all works. If the goal was to make the most entertaining, exciting movie he could, Stallone succeeded magnificently. He succeeded brilliantly. And he didn't take the movie off. That's the thing. I can call it a guilty pleasure movie. I can agree in general with the critics who said this is a piece of trash. It's trashy, but I wouldn't call it a piece of trash. I certainly would not give it a 30%. I would have this movie as 3 stars out of 4, despite what I've said. Well, I'm a little bit of a different kind of critic. You know, with the historian's brain, I calculate things differently than most people. So, a number of years ago, well, no, it was during COVID, Sylvester Stallone is legendarily restless. He is one of the most restless people that I know of. And this came across very clearly and I recommend you see it, it's on Netflix, the documentary on him called Sly. If we're comparing docus on major figures, in this case, 2 guys who were rivals and are now BFFs, the Arnold documentary is way better. It goes into much more detail and it's a sort of warts and all. And I know that there's certain things that Arnold has done over the years that have pissed a lot of people off. What I like about the Arnold documentary, it's in 3 parts. He doesn't run from it. There's a lot of stuff in there that he was okay with. You know, when I say he was okay with, he talked about things that he would probably rather have forgotten existed. And he was very forthcoming and kind of fell on his sword a number of times. I kind of respect that. Sly didn't really want to do that. He wasn't in that much of a reflective mood, but in the Sly documentary, you see very clearly the man can't sit still. He can't sit still. Even when he's in a car, in a passenger seat, he can't stop moving. He just can't stop moving. The guy is a whirling dervish, even in his 70s. So when COVID hit, and Stallone, a little nervous, worried about the, you know, like normal stuff, he decided, since Hollywood was temporarily on ice as far as new production and everybody was, you know, there were some independent films that were continuing. It was a very, very weird time. We remember Tom Cruise going nuts on the set of one of the Mission Impossible movies because he was worried they were going to get shut down there. Stallone went back to the editing room and did something he had wanted to do, but he hadn't had a chance to do because he's so damn busy all the time because he can't sit still. He was now forced to stop working, but there was nothing preventing him from going into the editing room, revisiting a lot of the footage that he shot but didn't use for Rocky IV, and seeing, hey, can I do something here? Is there a scenario where I can maybe I could come up with a different cut? And, you know, for the fans, this was something he was doing for the fans. So he went back and found the old masters, the old, you know, film cans, the reels. And so Rocky IV originally was a director's cut. They didn't take the film away from him. He released exactly the movie he wanted to in 1985. But Sly found so much incredible footage which he didn't use, and he said, you know what? I'm going to take out some of it. He didn't literally say this, but to himself, he clearly said, I'm going to make, because he had footage of Drago, which makes Drago more human, if that makes sense. He took out the overly jingoistic aspects, you know, the more of the us against them. There's less of that now. He added more scenes between Rocky and Adrian. He gave Apollo a better send-off. There's actually more footage, and this is in the new cut. There's more footage of Apollo giving it back to Drago earlier in the fight. And there's just more of Apollo explaining his warrior mentality, the code of the glass, all of that stuff. And so he reconceived it while, you know, as I say, the movie business was shut down. He did a lot of updates, and this is another thing I love about Stallone. You wouldn't think that he would be so transparent on social media, but he's fantastic. And as he was doing this, he was posting updates on the daily on his Instagram story, and he did a lot of regular posts, you know, keeping fans updated. I'm still working. I hope to have a cut for you guys. I'm excited. Real great stuff. Great, like fan service, but great stuff. So he completed what he called Rocky Vs Drago. That's how he retitled his new cut of Rocky IV. And he doesn't call it and didn't call it a director's cut. And I'm not calling it a director's cut. It's simply a reimagining of the original film. And I saw it, a friend of mine actually went to a screening, which is fantastic, and Stallone, it was a Q&A. I want to say that it appeared in about 25 to 50 theaters across the country when he finished the cut. I'm not sure on the number, but then it immediately hit Amazon Prime, and I bought it for, I rented it for $6. So the thing is, if you ask me on a scale of 1 to 10, how do I judge Rocky IV, the 1985, the original cut that Sly put out? 7.5. It's a 3-star movie. How do I judge Rocky Vs. Drago? 7.5. It's still a 3-star movie to me, even with all the problems I have with it. So the amazing thing is, about 60% of the film is different, meaning different takes are used, different shots within, for example, Apollo versus Drago, the James Brown shtick during the fight with Apollo versus Drago, and the climactic fight. There are tons of different angles used and different setups and all of this. Even with 60% new material, it still feels like the Rocky IV we know and love. And it is every bit the guilty pleasure it always was. The movie isn't necessarily better in the new format. It was fine. It was incredibly, phenomenally entertaining to begin with. But I would say any fan of Rocky IV, if you've seen it like me 15 or 20 times, yet another movie, right? You Gen Xers know this. HBO and Cinemax ran that movie in very heavy rotation. Same with films of the era such as The Natural, which I've talked about, Cocoon, Ron Howard's fantastic movie about the old guys who become young. There are certain films in heavy rotation, and Rocky IV was on HBO and Cinemax all the time, circa 1986-87. I watched it every single time it was on. I couldn't get enough of it, and to this day, I'm still a huge fan. I was so excited to see Rocky versus Drago, and I enjoyed it as much as I could possibly have, because it wasn't going to suddenly become a 4-star movie. But I love the alternate takes. I just think it's incredible that he had that much footage. It's almost ridiculous, but he could have made a 2.5-hour movie if he wanted to. That's how much great footage he had, that he put so much of it back in. Just a great job by him, that he did it, that he wanted to do it, and did it for the fans, for the right reason. Yes, he was restless. He didn't know what to do with himself. He was going berserk in his house, but he put so much effort into the new cut. And as I say, if you have not seen Rocky versus Drago, you must see it if you're a fan of Rocky IV. It doesn't tarnish anything. This is not like what the Star Wars, fuck George. Like, no. It's just a different concept of the same film, and it still feels like the Rocky IV we all know and love. This has been episode 185 and the 15th entry in our continuing series, Guilty Pleasure Movies of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you so much for joining me on this ride home. I get really excited when I talk about these movies. There's something about a guilty pleasure movie that really gets you going. Or a movie that's a favorite that a lot of people tell you sucks. I don't know that many people who tell me Rocky IV sucks, to be honest. But if you catch this episode on the YouTube channel and haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 186, probably in the studio, real soon. Till then, don't stop nothing. Peace.